That's great. I think we're good to go. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. I know everyone watching later will appreciate this and appreciate the free CEUs.
Cool.
Okay. Thanks, John.
So in that work, like why it was called multi-systemic, because basically I was working with any system that was around the kid, around the child, and trying to get them all working towards the same goal of moving them away from what was causing too many consequences. Like if someone's involved in the juvenile justice system, when they turn 18, they're like 90% to get stuck in it. But if they get out of it before they turn 18, usually that they're never involved with, there's like a 90-something% chance they'll never be involved with it again. So again, like trying to get all these systems around the child to move in the right direction. So there was already, as I was coming into working at Self-Space, I did that for about 3.5, 4 years. And then coming into Self-Space, knowing I wanted to work with couples, it already sort of like gained this capacity of working with multiple people in the room. Sometimes I had 4, 5, 6 people in the room when I was working. Generally, it was usually the child and the 2 primary caregivers, or sometimes just a single caregiver. But a lot of times working with multiple people. So I kind of say that like if you've never done work where you've been working with multiple people in the room, like you're gonna feel that. You're like, wow, this feels really crowded. Wow, like they said that. Where the heck do I go? Right. And so be kind to yourself in that. Like this is going to be a capacity that you're going to grow if you've never done any of this work before. But also I'm going to give you some real things that I like to call handholds or sort of a direction, a clinical compass, so to speak, in this work. None of it's going to be hugely like clinically uh like theoretical, but you're going to hear that. Like you're going to hear where my attachment lens comes in. You're going to hear where stuff I've learned from Gottman comes in. You're going to hear where stuff comes in from, I really love Terry Real, if you know him. Um, you're going to hear things that I learned from my clinical supervisor, Doug Shirley. And these are just all things that kind of gave me this direction of like, how do I do this work? And so, yeah, I'm going to try to pass that on to you all. So how are you coming in today? I know a lot of times when I told therapists that I do couples work, like, wow, you're brave. Or how the heck do you do that? So I just kind of jokingly say, couple work? Really? You want to do that? How come? Right? Like, why are you here? Like, what is it about you that you're interested in this work? What questions are you already coming in with? Right? So I'll kind of open it up for a second for anyone that wants to share that. Whether you can unmute and verbally say that, or you can write something in the chat, whatever works for you. But how you coming in? What questions you coming in? What anxieties, worries? What are you holding?
Hi all, I'm Hannah. I've never done couples work, so this is really going to be interesting. I think maybe like many of you guys, I work with a lot of individuals who have relationship issues. And so I think doing couples work has always been, for me, like on the horizon, because I would love to just see the dynamic in person in real time instead of having like a more biased view just working on the individual. So I guess I'm a little concerned or worried that it'll feel like 2 people ganging up on like the one therapist, but yeah, excited to be here.
Any other thoughts or questions you're coming in with?
Yeah, hey, I'm Nathan. Mine's kind of maybe the opposite, or like the opposite way of looking at that same thing is individually. Under, I have an understanding of what it might look like to sit with one person, but with a couple, being able to keep that focus on the couple versus like leaning into one or another person because maybe their trauma is higher or their what kind of shows up in the room is kind of more robust. But I just started working a couple weeks ago, so with couples, so I only have one couple, and so I'm pretty new at this.
Yeah, I'm writing that down because I don't know if that's specifically in the present in some of what I'll talk about. It might come out. But I'm going to give you some permission to lean in and towards one person in the dyad in any given session. Sometimes that is needed. It's not wrong. But there is sort of an art to kind of how you zoom in, zoom out, where you're joining, right? And yeah, so I appreciate that question. Cool. Well, we'll keep going. And as questions come up, feel free to either drop them in the chat or, say, hey, John, I got something based off of what you said there. So I'll kind of take you through my first 3 sessions and beyond, so to speak. Some of these will be very about that first 1, 2, 3 sessions, and some of it will kind of be stuff that you're listening to throughout. But again, I'm trying to like, if you're like, okay, I want to book my first couple and I just have no idea, right? Like these are things that kind of to me, again, just give you those first steps. And you may even know this when you're walking towards the unknown, if you have the first couple steps, eventually you get more comfortable, you have enough of your bearings and you can get your full brain again, right? Like, remember when I worked with my supervisor, Doug, he's like, oh, it sounds like this is when your brain fell out, right? Meaning like, like you're having that internal thing. So I'm trying to give you something that you can sort of grab onto instead of feeling like you're drowning. So the first 3 sessions, you're assessing that you can give the level of care that this couple deserves, right? So you're going to be more activated in couples work than you are in individual work. I can almost guarantee that. And so you're noticing what's going on for you, what you're hearing. Is it an appropriate fit for you clinically, where you feel comfortable enough, I guess I should say. And the couple is assessing you, right? Like if you can give them the level of care that they really want, they feel comfortable enough, safe enough with you. Um, I don't, in my style of couples work, I'm not working with anyone who sort of has active DV going on. And so I'm listening for that. Um, I have a threshold for some people that may feel like, oh, I wouldn't even work with that. So you're kind of listening for that. What is your threshold of like, can I contain this? Do I want to be responsible for on that clinical level for the care of this couple? And you're just kind of letting yourself acclimate, so to speak, to the weather and the environment of the relationship. Don't put a whole lot of pressure on yourself to like have to make something happen. Now, that's me coming out, like that's often a worry I have in all my work. But whatever that is for you, you're kind of just listening to that. Setting some rules and expectations. I tell people, when you're emailing me, include everyone. That's so that I know everyone is on the same page. One of us is going to forget. So when I respond, I'll add the other person, like some of that email stuff. I let them know I'm not a secret holder. There is some couples therapists that hold secrets and continue to do work. I know for me, that would hinder what I would be able to do for them. That would take a big piece of my clinical brain and myself. I would have to spend so much energy on not like that. It's like, to me, it's not even worth it. So I recommend that for everyone. If you feel like you can do it or you're already doing it, I'm not going to have any judgment there, but I let them know that right away. I kind of say, if there's something you've never told the relationship or the relationship doesn't know about, if you want to share it with me, you're also ready to share that with the relationship. You're working at building that fidelity to the relationship. I'm listening for what the relationship needs, right? Um, So that first session, I do a lot of like, listening for strengths, looking to hype them up, like kind of say like, good for you for finally coming here. Um, uh, like how wise of you to know that you've reached the limit of what you feel like you know how to do or what you can do. And how wise of you to come to a place where you hope to find the care, the support, the tools that you need to move beyond where you feel stuck in, whether that's healing or relationship dynamics or wherever it is. I'm listening for the roles each person plays in the relationship. Who brought who to therapy? Um, and does that speak to the roles that are already in the relationship? Not that is that good or bad, right? Like you're just listening and seeing how that plays out and how that makes sense to the relationship. Does the relationship feel flexible or does it feel rigid? Does it feel dynamic or does it feel, just really concrete? Um, what is the relationship telling me? Right? That's really like when you're worried about that, am I going to choose sides? um, Things like that. Just like with individual work where you have clients that you like, man, I could be best friends with this person. And there's other people like, you have a different feeling about them. But of course, I imagine you're still working with them because like you still can access care for them. Um, One of the interns came up to me the other day and was kind of like explaining some boundary stuff that was going on. And they were kind of like, should I keep working with them? Am I supposed to like call them out on this or whatnot? And we kind of talked through some of those things, but I was kind of saying like, and this is what I'm always paying attention to, is there anything getting in the way of me being able to care about you? Right. And so that's you again, like you're taking in all the information and you're just focusing that towards what is being co-created. um what am I feeling each person needs from me or needs me to be? Right? Am I the referee? Am I the judge, the jury? Am I the one that's there to tell their husband that they're not well and they need help? um am I, and again, like I'm noticing, how do I feel to be in that role? Is that the role that the relationship really needs me to be? Does it need me to be that for a time? I don't have to participate in that, but I'm just like tolerating it to an extent. Um, but keeping it there, not trying to necessarily push it out or push it away, but okay, again, what is that telling me about the relationship? Because when we can't find what we need within the relationship, we look outwards, right? When we can't find something within us, we look outwards. That's why we compare ourselves, judge ourselves, all these different things. Like the relationship is doing the same thing. It can't find something that it needs within it. So you're going to feel that it's going to want you to be that. And that's fine, but you're trying to say like, how do I bring that need to them, to the relationship? How I help them figure out how to create that for themselves. But I don't mind being a surrogate or, a temporary placeholder for that. There's some roles that couples are gonna be like, nope, not having that role. I'm not here to decide whether you're staying together or if you're breaking up. You'll hear this throughout. I'm an advocate for the relationship. I'm a voice for the relationship, and you let me know in what I'm voicing about what the relationship needs, if you're still in or if you're out, right? So, because I remember feeling that when I first started, like, man, what if, someone's coming in, they're like, hey, we need help to figure out if we should stay married or stay dating. I was like, I don't want that role. There's people that do discernment counseling, and things like that. I don't know much about it. Maybe if I learned about it, I would appreciate that work. I don't know yet, but right now, like, I just don't do that. It's not a role I want, and it's not really, yeah, what like the clients I'm wanting to work with. If they need that, they can find someone that'll do that. But um, I'm advocating for the relationship and what it needs. Um, Second session, you don't have to do this. I think it's just as much for me as it is for the clients. But second session, if you do 50-minute sessions, it's 25. If you're doing 60, or if you're going to do 75, whatever you're going to do, split it half and half. Again, with that reminder, I'm not a secret holder. But it's even like sort of a slowing down for even for me. All right, next session, I won't have two people staring me down, wanting me to solve all their problems. I can sit with each one of them. I didn't put this in there, which is also very important, but this is where you are listening. Like, what can't I ask the relationship? And when I'm saying that, like, I'm like, is there DV going on that they didn't bring into the first session? Is there like overt, emotional harm or physical violence or aggression? Like I'm listening for that. Um, but I'm listening for what does it feel like just to sit with this person one-on-one? Sometimes I come into that second session with something that happened in the first session. I'm like, oh man, I need to ask that person first alone this question. And I come in with that. Sometimes I leave the first session not having like an urgency like that. Sometimes I do. Um, of course, I tell them in the first session, or even when I'm doing a sort of a consult or an intake, our second session will be just me and you one-on-one. That's so you can take up all the space for 25 minutes. So you don't have to watch your words or be careful with what you say. Again, if you want to share a secret with me there, be ready to share that with the relationship. Um, and I'll even tell them, like, if you tell me a secret, it's not like I come back and I'm just going to put you on blast. Like, I'm going to use my clinical and thoughtful judgment on how I bring that back in. But if you drop a bomb like infidelity, I mean, that's one for me. Like, we can do nothing until that's there, like, until we address that. Because sort of always the thing for me is secrets keep us sick. Um, so there's a couple I've been working with for 2 years that a big secret just came out. Um, and I was surprised by the content of the secret, but you always felt it there the entire time. It was the one thing that was keeping this relationship sick for sure. It wasn't the only thing, but for sure, until that secret was in the open and out, like it was just going to be like eating away or having a presence in the relationship. It was really interesting, a recent second session where when I was with the couple together, I felt certain things. And then when I was meeting, it was a heterosexual couple and I was meeting with the woman. And it was so interesting when I met with her one-on-one, I felt so much danger. Um, like I felt so scared that I was going to say something wrong that she was going to get mad at me about. And when I started to get to know her and like what that was tied to, so what I was noticing is how much she protects him from that. I'm curious. I'm still developing. I've only met with them 3 times, but it was so helpful for me to meet with her one-on-one, where there was this guard that came down in her, and she had gone through some pretty significant trauma in the last year, and there was like a safeness or a guard that came down that she let me feel that with her that I didn't feel in the session one-on-one. And one of the biggest reasons she wanted to come to therapy was so that she could invite her partner into that more. Um, so really interesting. It's the one-on-one things. Sometimes they feel kind of really profound, and sometimes just like I checked a box, but it's always helpful there. And then kind of moving forward, depending on what the couple needs and wants, I'll do more one-on-one sessions, but I always keep it equal, right? If I met with you for a whole session, I'm going to meet with your partner for a whole session. Right? Because I'm keeping that fidelity to the relationship. Sometimes, I know for me, someone will just show up by themselves. And I talked with them. I said, hey, I'm more than fine meeting with you. I find out like why the other person's there. Sometimes like, oh, they had a last minute meeting. Sometimes they just had a big fight and they're not there. But explain like we can have this, or do we not want to kind of get through like why the other person isn't there? And then I can kind of roll with that. That's up to you. Again, you're sensing if like that feels like too much of a distraction for you. Um, but there's been times where like something has come up and it's like, man, each person needs a whole session to kind of process some of this and talk about this. And then kind of, again, with the role they're kind of giving, like, help us digest this, John. Help us like make sense of this or organize this sometimes. So I love the second session. Again, sometimes it's just a breather for me as I'm trying to acclimate and get my bearings in the relationship. Um, so I think that's a good thing to do. Um, the third session and beyond. Well, let me stop there. What's coming up for you so far? Anything you want to speak to? Any questions coming up? Anything I said not feel like enough? And you're like, John, all right, you said that, but what about this?
Oh, yeah, this is Vernon. Just a quick question. Were you saying that you normally do one-on-one for the second session? Like first session is both, and then it's usually the second that's the one-on-one, and then you usually split it up. Like you don't do an hour with one person and then an hour session with the other person?
I do if they want that. Generally where I'm kind of just keeping it, yeah, no, I've had that. Couples are like, no, I need a whole session. I'm like, all right,
Mhm.
we'll make space for that. But some of that, sometimes that's just like wanting to like keep the cost down for them. Sometimes I'm thinking about, right? Like if that's an issue for them, but totally like, or if there's sometimes when I'm seeing couples on an every other week, it's like, if I do two, it could be like 3, 4 weeks until we all meet again, which is fine. But if there's an urgency in them to get some momentum going, yeah, so there's not a hard and fast rule where it has to be 50-50. That's generally what I first offer. And then people tell me pretty quickly whether or not they want a whole session or not.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Mhm. Cool. So, that first sentence there, you are more proactive in couples work than individual work. Now, that's somewhat of a comparison of me. Maybe you are really active in your individual work comparatively to me. Um, I just know for me, like in my style of individual therapy, a lot of times I'm like, all right, I'm walking alongside the client. And as I kind of see something, I point this out or that out, but it really feels like they're guiding me and then I'm being curious about what they're bringing. But with individual work, I'm going to be a little bit more proactive in the sense of like, again, like I'm this voice, this advocate for the relationship, right? So, with that same person that I met one-on-one with, where I said I felt that sense of danger, that happened in our third session, where there was this question that she asked her partner, and or he talked about this question that often comes up, and he's like, man, I don't often know how to answer that. So what I said was, and you would probably do this individual work too, but it's a little bit different, where it's like, man, when you asked him that question, I felt like it was like dangerous to answer. Like he had to answer it the right way or else. Right. And so that was a sense of like, I was voicing a feeling I was having for the relationship or about the relationship dynamic. So I'm listening for those places where I can speak or be something that is not being said. Right. Whereas in individual work, I may take a little bit more time and just hold that for session after session after session and session, like, and not really share that. But with couples work, I'm going to probably bring it a bit more sooner. Because again, there's some of these dynamics that are playing out, and being involved in that is usually really helpful. So you're usually more proactive. You're more active in couples work, in my opinion. You're looking for how can I plug into the relationship to notice what it needs. Um, Really looking for wherever you can give credit to the relationship. That you're trying to tell them you've gotten this far, right? Whether it's been 3, 4, 5, 10 years that you've been together, it's like, you're really listening for what is really beautiful about the relationship, what is really good, especially when you get couples coming in with high conflict. Um, Another intern came up to me and they were like, man, I just, met with a couple and like all they do is just scream the whole time. What do you do? And at first I was like, hell if I know. I don't know what you do. But there was also this sense of like, but then he invited me to think of like, when I'm in that, what am I doing? Right. And it's listening through the yelling, listening through the arguing to what is the need that's behind it. Right. And because I'm always trying to find tenderness right? And my definition of tenderness is moving towards what you need, not what is deserved. You'll notice in couples if they're operating from a place of deserve. If you didn't do that, I wouldn't have done this. Because you did that, I did that, right? If you wouldn't have said it that way, I wouldn't have said it this way, right? Like the back and forth of that sort of that defensiveness that'll come up. And behind that defensiveness, behind that yelling, behind whatever the tactic is, that's where you'll find the wound, right? Where my attachment links comes in, why does it make sense that these two people ended up together? Right? In sort of my understanding of attachment, I often say that you'll choose the enemy that you know, hoping that you can finally find the healing you always needed in that relationship. Right? So when they say you marry your mom or marry your dad, yes and no, but more the sense you're going to marry a person with that you have the defenses or the coping skills to deal with someone that you've probably dealt with before in your life, probably one of your primary caregivers, but with the hope that you'll finally find something better, something more. And then couples are ending up in my office because they're trying to do that and they're stuck in that. They need that help. Where have they just not yet experienced what they've needed to get to that next place in their relationship with themselves and with their partner, right? So I'm really listening. Why does it make sense that these two ended up together? And seeing that both as a strength and as where they may be limited or where the frontier is. Like they know this really well, but what's out there is a whole lot different, right? So that's why like you're often like trying to pay attention to enactments that are happening or reenactments that are happening in the session and where you're joining in that, right? Like where your stuff is getting triggered in that, right? And my view on that, like, of course you're going to get activated. Of course your stuff is going to come in, and that's not wrong, right? You probably already know this, but I'm just being an advocate for you in that of like, of course it is. And when you know that it's there, you can put it in the place. So again, it doesn't get into the way of what you can offer them. It also may be activated because it's something that you can use that is helpful to them, but you kind of need to notice it so you know what to do with it. A lot of times I'll say, and this is kind of scary, but I'll say most relationships are doomed from the start. They're like, what? Huh? And what I mean by that is, think of this even for yourself. At the start of every relationship, you didn't have everything you needed in the beginning of that journey to get to a place of health and happiness and a vibrant and creative relationship. Like you started with what you have, and eventually you're going to get to a point in a relationship where you have yet to go in relationship. Right? And so you experience this in an individual way, but you're feeling it, you're experiencing it with the couple right then and there. Right? So you're really listening. Where is the limitation of their experience? Where have they still not yet experienced healing, care, warmth, safety? Right? And then they're moving into their defenses, into their attachment style. And so you're just really listening. So doomed from the start in the sense of like, of course, you didn't have everything you needed at the start of this relationship. So again, so wise, so thoughtful, so good of you to be here to find that. Because my thing is, unless you've just been literally struck by lightning, all of your wounds come from a relationship. So healing only comes within relationship, right? On that individual client level, it's that relationship with me that we hope translates out to their real life relationships. Same as in the couples work, right? Like where has each of them yet to experience healing within relationship? And that protector comes out, right? Because what is behind that protector is the most vulnerable, most hurt part of yourself, usually your childhood self. And that protector has been there to protect that child, but we need to ask that protector to go to the side so that the relationship can actually give that wounded part of that person what it needs, right? So in what's co-created in the relationship, you can blame or you can police behaviors, and you're going to find yourself wanting to do that or actually doing it in moments. but you're noticing what the behavior is telling me. What is the behavior protecting, right? Dysfunctional behavior has a function. So always start there. Don't necessarily go right to this dysfunctional behavior needs to stop right away, or this relationship is ruined. And there, and you have two people looking back at you being like, heal us, fix us, get us beyond. Like you feel sometimes that desperation or that longing for that, right? So I said a lot there. Any questions, thoughts coming up for you? Anything you even just kind of want to work out loud by saying it? I know I do a lot of vocal processing.
So I'm not sure, I'm putting some questions in the chat, but I'm not sure if anyone is seeing them, but these are more logistic questions in terms of like, does your intake paperwork for couples look different than when you work with individuals? And then also, how do you determine therapy goals for the relationship if each person like wants different things?
Yeah, so at this point, at Self Space, we have a pretty like bare bones intake questionnaire, unless you yourself have developed or used an assessment. So for me personally, I just keep with the bare bones one. And then once I meet the couple, I decide if there is any other assessments that I would want to do. Gottman has a cool one I like to use. So me personally, I haven't utilized like an intake questionnaire in my clinical work, but if that's something that is part of it, definitely do that. Yeah, but for me personally, I don't do that. Was that both the questions? I feel like there was two.
Oh, how do you determine what the goals are for therapy if each person wants something different?
Yeah, so I don't know how satisfying this answer will be for a question like that. In some ways, the couple will have it for you. You'll hear a lot of communication, conflict resolution. Like you'll hear like the same 3 to 5 things couples will come in with that goal. But my goal, right, is a lot of what I've already been saying, right? I took this from Terry Real and I love it. And he does this with his couples, right? And this is where tenderness comes on. He goes, you are no better and you are no worse than the person sitting next to you or sitting across from you, right? And they both do that. You are no better or no worse. I am no better or no worse, right? That is always my goal, that you get out of these places of deserve. And I'm trying to foster this way. How do you get to a place of being advocates for each other's health and care and safety? Right. So my goal is, how do I increase safety, warmth, and connection? Right now, so I'm listening for where do each of them feel unsafe? Where do each of them feel isolated and lonely? Where do them feel like there's only, you'll often feel like part of like those first 3 sessions, you're also listening for who does the relationship have enough space for everyone's needs, or is everyone's needs taking up all the space? And the thing could be like, well, you're just too needy, or you're too unhealthy, or you're the sick one, or you're the bad one, or you're the asshole, you're the angel, right? Like whatever some of those roles are. And what I'm wanting to invite them to is what is needed, right? Because these are all defenses. We want to honor them, but again, they're getting in the way of what is healed, right? So I'm always trying to get to tenderness. I would say my main goal in couples work is, how do I increase tenderness in the relationship? And some of those more practical things like kind of come out, right? But I get a lot of couples, there is some couples that are coming in that have very little like practical skills around like, active listening or certain things, right? Like, and I think how to work with clients probably in that way. I've had a lot of clients, they were already like Googling and trying all these things on their own already, right? Like they know like sort of those sort of things. And so we're trying to go beyond that to an extent. Um, but again, I'm trying to increase warmth, safety, and the availability of feeling loved and cared for. Um, yeah, yeah. Um, I love using the metaphor of a garden, because it's about nurturing, right? And the relationship is this living, breathing thing. And we're going to take a look at your garden. Part of it are going to be thriving. Parts of it, there's a bunch of weeds in. Part of it you've been ignoring. Part of it you have no idea what to do with. And we're just looking at the overall health of the relationship, of the garden. And again, looking at it from a place of need. Does it need new soil? Does it need water? Does it need more sun? Does it need fertilizer? Where have I started to garden somewhere else because I can't find what I need in this garden, right? Whether that's my job, whether that's, sometimes infidelity, which that will be another training at some point. I love doing, I do work with couples with infidelity, and when they do an intro training kind of to that, like, you're working with a couple, all of a sudden they're like infidelity, and you're like, well, I don't do infidelity work. Well, you are now. Now people coming in right off the bat with that, you can screen that out if that's not something you work with, but I imagine you're going to get surprised. But anyway, my conceptualization, a lot of that is you were looking outside the relationship for something you needed. And as soon as you're doing that, again, there's a doomed from the start sort of thing there, right? Now, I'm not against, like, it takes a village, not one relationship should be the whole thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the things that you really need in your romantic relationship that you're finding someplace else. Of course, like friendships, all that stuff, like all of that is very, very important. But sort of speaking to something like, well, I need compassion in the relationship. And so I spend a lot of time with this over here because this person gives me a lot of compassion, and that's good enough. Right? But now you've stopped tending to and nurturing a part of your garden. The relationship's going to be impacted by that, right? Now you can go do that, but my hope is always that can even be therapy. You can be coming to therapy on an individual level and say, well, I'll just get what I need from therapy and never bring it to your relationship, right? So again, that piece of where some of this will be helpful in, like, what am I colluding with the client in that actually may be unhelpful, or what in perpetuating with them? Not to, fill you with blame or shame or guilt or anything, but just kind of like, yeah, like that's the role they gave me. And now I have a little bit better way of noticing how to like break out of that. So, cool. Everything is co-created, right? Pretty easy one there. And so, but again, like when you're trying to be worried about like not choosing sides, like there's a co-creation. And so, Nathan, with your question around like leaning into one couple, one person in the dyad or the other. I have this one couple I've been working with, I think over 2 years. And there has been sessions where like one has revolved, like been primarily about what is going on with the one person. Right. But and I remember the first time that happened for him, like, man, like, I wonder how the other person feels. Sometimes even the couple has come back and talked to me like, yeah, you were in the hot seat next week. I wonder if I'll be in the hot seat this week. Right. And it was more of an enduring thing of like that was helpful. That was hard, but that was helpful. Right. Like if you have, so I have this somewhere else in here, but like pursuer distancer, right? You'll often have that in a relationship. But when you have pursuer distancer and everyone's doing this, and this is co-created, right? Like the distance never changes. It just stays the same. You have one chasing the other, right? Now, sometimes it's just one direction, just one person changing, but sometimes it goes back and forth. But what we're trying to do is who's ever chasing, I'm saying, stop chasing them. If you're running, stop running. And now we're stopping that dynamic and we're asking you to like look and face each other and come towards each other. And one session may be like, why are you running away from this? Right? That attachment piece, right? Like that's very like, anxious avoidant attachment style, right? Or at least an anxious avoidant dynamic within the relationship. So you're listening, you're noticing that. And you may focus into like to be curious about like why the other person has this role, why it makes sense for them. And that can be really helpful with the other in like learning about them and connecting with them and trying to understand behaviors that they were interpreting completely different. So you're not doing anything wrong if a session does focus on one person or the other, but it's all with that sense of like the relationship is going to benefit from this. We're not doing this because you deserve this or you're the more sick one. That can be true, right? You need some extra support here, right? Like, I think of it of like even, you know, when I have a couple where one of them has been in therapy for a while, so they have a bit more awareness or they have a bit more practice articulating their feelings. Sometimes they've weaponized their individual therapy in their relationships. So always interested by that. That'll come into the couples work too. But you're listening for how come the other person is doing that and how is the other person responding to that. So you still get to that systemic co-created piece. So there's nothing wrong with focusing on one person. Sometimes that can be multiple things in a row where something is focused or leaned more in one direction. But you always feel like if we don't do that, we can't get to what's next. Like when you do that, like we have to do this or we can't get here, right? I know that's pretty concrete. It's a little bit more, you know, it's not so black and white like that, but you'll feel that like this just feels important. So you're trying to stay attuned to that. I'm big on, right, so how we get out of the blame game of like, if you didn't do this, I wouldn't have done that, is no matter what, you are always responsible for what you do. And so, and the relationship needs you to take responsibility. The relationship needs you to do that, and it will be better for it. If you just keep giving away all your power by blaming the other, you will never get what you need, right? You'll stay protected, you know, you'll justify your actions, which is fine, but that's contributing probably to the stuckness you're feeling. Like Gottman talks about like defensiveness never gives you what you need. I'll even like be a bit more dramatic with it in a way and be like, it's like going on a northbound train and you needed to go south, right? How that works really well is someone that stonewalls or avoids or runs away. Like your defenses are telling you to run away because this person feels, you know, dangerous to you or unsafe. But by running away, you won't get what you actually need. But I also don't want to shame and guilt them. I want to honor, I want to understand. I want to know why you're running. And help your partner to invite you back. But again, you are responsible for that. You can't blame, well, if they didn't do this, if they didn't do that, sure, fair enough, right? Like that all may be true, but I'm going to invite to you, but you ran. And when you run, you're running from what you need. So defensiveness is our protector and we honor it. We don't shame it, but we also see how it's getting in the way of what you actually need. Right. And that'll come up in all different kinds of ways, but you're just kind of noticing for that sort of that linear sort of thinking. And you want to empower a client. You were always the captain of your needs, and the other person gets to be your biggest cheerleader, advocate. They partner with you in that. So instead of like, I need to be everything they need, and they're supposed to be everything I need, I'm like, no, you are supposed to be what you need. And then when you are doing that, right? Because that's enmeshment, right? Like I'm listening for enmeshment. I'm trying to get to individuation where you can feel deeply intimate, deeply close, but still be distinctly and uniquely yourself, because that's where you find your deepest needs are met. They're not met in someone else doing that for you, right? So you probably do a lot of that in your individual work, I imagine, but you're kind of doing it a little bit more in real time and inviting that. That's that active role you'll have in trying to invite them to do that. Inviting couples to be curious about the other's feelings rather than take responsibility for them. I do a lot of this. Sometimes that's all I do for a really long time. I invite couples to be curious about the other person's feelings rather than being responsible for them. in that, what you find is when I am curious, I'm moving towards safety, warmth, and care, right? If I'm curious about why you're yelling at me right now, right? Now, it's hard to do that in the moment. None of this is, I imagine most of the tools I'm giving my clients, I'm like, this is what you'll do in the repair. Because to me, repair is just as beautiful as if you never made the mistake to begin with. Repair is what we've experienced least in our lives, in my opinion. And so many of these tools is what you do afterwards. Like when you're curious about what happened for you and for the other, you find what the need is there. You find what the wound is, and it softens you and it gets you to this place of tenderness of how do I invite us to what we need, not what we deserve, right? Because I'm like, because there's even the bad or the sick person in the relationships like, well, I'm an asshole, I'm a piece of shit, I'm this, I'm that, right? Like I deserve this, and like that just, we know what that does. And so we're even inviting them out. Don't give yourself what you deserve, invite yourself to what you need. So that curiosity piece, a lot of just stirring curiosity in them. Why do you think they're doing that rather than just telling them to stop? Terry Real has this saying, there's no intimacy in complaining. Don't tell me what I'm doing wrong. Invite me in on how to make it right. Again, because vulnerability is always medicine, right? So I'm listening to the relationship of where is there so many defenses because that's so vulnerability, and vulnerability is where we're going to find the medicine, right? And if I just complain, my defenses are up. I'm blaming you. I'm taking my power away. I'm not actually telling you what I need, right? Like I'm just name calling, or I'm stonewalling. What's really like Gottman has those four horsemen. I love bringing that into the session and having couples read through that and say, hey, don't police the other with these, but where do you find yourself, this being one of your tools or tactics in the midst of a conflict or an argument or a vulnerability, right? So again, trying to get to that place of getting defenses down so that you can be vulnerability, and curiosity to me is always a great first step towards that. Again, notice where the couple is looking outside the relationship to get their needs met or soothed. And again, don't police that. You're going to come in, my husband cares more about football than he cares about me, right? And so how can you get me to get him to stop watching so much football and to prioritize the family and the kids and all of that, right? Fair request, sure, right? Like not going to argue that that's not necessarily, but again, I'm listening towards that of what is the other person finding in that? What's the relationship there? What's going on there that they're doing that, right? So less about stop doing that. We got to be curious about what function is that having, right? And it may be dysfunctional, right? But we need to understand dysfunctional behavior's function so that we can make it dysfunctional. So making dysfunctional behavior dysfunctional, meaning that it doesn't work anymore. It's outdated. It doesn't actually get what you want. When you run, usually I chase you and then you just run harder. Well, I'm staying here and I'm saying, please come close. I want you. I need you, right? And if you keep running, that just keeps hurting me, right? So again, like that vulnerability piece, right? You're trying to invite them back to. The secrets keep you sick. What does the relationship need to grow or expand? You'll find that in the secrets, again, it's a protective thing. It's not a moral, it's not a character thing. It's kind of like, I need to protect this at all cost, that I will even lie, which we all know, like just eats away at trust and connection and rapport, creates isolation and shame and guilt. But it must be so, so vulnerable for you to go there that you are willing to lie. Man, wow, that is a powerful thing, right? And so again, that it's going to keep you sick, But when you finally tell the truth, yes, there's going to be some collateral damage from that. And we'll have to spend some time dealing with that, especially if it's something devastating like infidelity, or just some sort of devastating secret, kind of along those lines. Like there's a lot that stops when infidelity starts. There's a lot that stops if things get violent or unsafe. So kind of with the assumption with all of this stuff, like what for you sort of stops the work, right? So none of this is to do in the midst of like violence or DV. I know I've kind of already said that. But you're always kind of listening, like, because there's some couples, like I met with them the first session, and then the second session, the woman told me it was a heterosexual couple, and the woman told me they were dating. She goes, the only reason I'm here is because I'm terrified of what he'll do if I break up with him. Which, because the last woman he broke up with, he basically put all of their dirty laundry out, right? And this woman had shared some pretty significant things about herself, about her life. And she's like, he's just going to tell everyone about that, right? And she was kind of hoping like couples therapy, maybe they get to a place where he wouldn't do that when they break up. And that was for me, I'm like, there's not enough safety in the relationship for me to do anything that I've talked about with you all today, right? So I was just like, I don't think I'll be able to continue with you all, right? If you're only here because you're terrified of what you'll experience when you leave, there's a different type of therapy for that than what I'm doing, right? So that's where I would stop with that. And invited them to, she was already in individual work. I even invited her to, like, this is what, based on what you told me, this is what I'm doing with it. This may not be the whole story, but if what you're telling me is 100% true, like you're afraid these things would happen, he would throw all your belongings down the garbage chute, like he would do these things, right? Then you need to work with your individual therapist to how to get out of there safely. And we can't do anything here until you are safe, right? So I'm always assessing for that. Am I inviting to something that would cause someone, right? Like there's certain relationships, if I make someone responsible for their behavior, they can't tolerate that and they will take that out on their partner, right? And so I'm listening for that. Like I don't want to participate in that. So I'm listening to, is this person able to tolerate this discomfort without harming the other person? So, all right, I've said a lot again. What's coming up for y'all? Any more questions? Any more thoughts?
Hey, John, I had a question for you. My name's Amanda. I was really, I think, racking my brain over this idea of teaching couples to be individuals, right? And like really leaning on like you are responsible for your own feelings. But I was wondering if you could talk through like how you might explain to a couple the difference between like taking care of ourselves emotionally, like on this like enmeshment versus opening the door to let people heal, and like lowering our defenses to like let somebody step in for that, and like what's the difference between that and like enmeshment, so like that overcorrection to always including the person in the room.
So enmeshment is when it shows up in a relationship, I can only be one thing, right? Like enmeshment often correlate, like there's a lot of times, and there's like a codependent dynamic. And why that's harmful is because you can only be one thing, right? And the fear with enmeshment is, right? Like if you think of that with an anxious attachment style, right? They can't tolerate any separation. So they want to know that you are like this. And if you're thinking and feeling and doing the same thing as them, then I don't have to worry about you going anywhere, right? And you can feel how suffocating it is. So it's kind of a sense of like, right? That's a defense mechanism. That's a protective factor. And you can honor that, but you're just inviting them to what it's actually, I say with defense or coping mechanisms, no matter what they are, is eventually they reach a point where they keep you for more than they give you. And so my invitation in that is how is this protection, though you may still need it, keeping you from what you actually need here? Enmeshment isn't real intimacy, right? So yes, like that individuation is really important, but individuation even, even if you do all this individual work, individuation, the rubber meets the road when you're actually doing that within relationship. So in couples work, that's what you're doing. Like you are inviting like doing even some personal work with them on like where they don't have good boundaries, where they don't have a sense of self, right? But you're not so much treating that on an individual level as you are of like, how do you be a partner to someone who has that dynamic, right? So again, like whatever, because I have this one couple and the heterosexual couple, the wife in the marriage is, we just need to go to more individual therapy, figure out our stuff, and then everything will, we just need to do that. But what we've come to learn about her and about the relationship is that's where she hides. In theory, all of that is good, and I'm 100% for that for her. But we've come to learn is where she hides. It's where you need to get better first before I'll trust you with, again, for me, vulnerability and intimacy is always the medicine. So I'm always listening for what is actually at odds with that. So there's a bit of a dance there for sure.
A quick question. What do you normally do if one of the people is in their own individual therapy? Do you have like a requirement that they both be in counseling, and not only one of them?
I don't unless we're like, we need this. Yeah, I don't have like a prerequisite that anyone is in that to work with me. Um, but like that one relationship I was talking about where like a big secret just came out, the person that disclosed the secret has not been in individual therapy, and we've been talking for a while that they've needed to be. So I've never required it, like I'm going to stop working with you until you do that. But yes, it's something when I know that it will, I'll tell them like this will only enhance what we're doing, right? If we this your work there will give you the space you need, and then you get to bring that here, and hopefully what you bring here you can bring there. So I don't require it unless you feel like again like it's that needs to get done before we can do more. If it really feels like it's getting in the way, but I don't know that right off the bat.
Mhm.
Um,
But
so
if one of the people is already in individual counseling, you don't require the other one to be like for balance, kind of.
no, no, no. Um, yeah, no, I've never required that. I'm just thinking real quickly, like if there would be something that would be gained from that. I'm not sure.
Okay,
So
cool.
yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. Yeah, some of this I've already jumped ahead. You're listening for that pursuer distancer dance. Who's the pursuer? Who's the distancer? And how do you get the dance to stop? Or in other relationship dynamics, I'll use like a merry-go-round, right? Like we're back on the merry-go-round again. We feel it. Like you're doing this, you're doing that, and we've been working for a while. Even with the four horsemen, I do this. Um, don't police someone who started the merry-go-round, who got on first, who made you get on. It's when you notice it, how do you invite yourself and the other to what is really needed, right? So again, like when I offer a tool, when I offer, you know, especially when I go through the four horsemen, I was like, I know what you're going to do. I would do this, and that would be, I'm going to take this, and every time you do it, be like, oh, you're name calling, oh, you're being resentful, oh, you're stonewalling, right? And then you're like, again, like you're gonna, those roles, those protectors is coming up. And what I say is, again, there's no intimacy in complaining. Notice what is happening and how do you invite each other to what is needed, right? So again, always putting the responsibility back on each person, right? And that's where you will find strength. That's where you will find healing. You let go and you lose a lot when you just blame, right? And blame the other. But again, if you're doing that, we're rubbing up against something real important. And how do I tread carefully and respectfully and honor what's going on there? But also invite you out of what you could gain through the vulnerability. So, what structures in the relationship are supporting bad behavior? That's going back to that piece of where is dysfunctional behavior functional? And speaking to that, being a voice to that, right? Like, trying to think of an example of this, but like, if I had some windshield wipers and the motor was kind of weak and not working, and I got a string and I tied it to my windshield wipers and I just pulled the string to wipe my windshield, and it gave it just enough of that leverage so then the motor would kind of do it. But I had to do that every time it was raining. It's kind of a very dysfunctional way to drive a car, but it works. It has a purpose. It's doing something. It's better than nothing at all. But you're also noticing how it's perpetuating things that are, again, keeping the relationship sick, keeping that garden from growing or blossoming, whatever's going on there. When I'm working with parents, I like to use a vehicle analogy a lot of times with new parents, because I'll say the relationship is learning to be parents for the first time, right? So maybe you came in here with a Toyota Tercel, and now you need like, the Chrysler minivan, right? The relationship is needs to grow beyond what it's become, right? Maybe what was just enough, you've now moved into that. Now it's created too much scarcity or too much need that now it's no longer tolerable. That's another piece where relationships are doomed from that start, right? Like eventually something's going to come in the relationship that you didn't even invite necessarily. It could be tragedy, right? Or it could be with the deep longing and wanting to become a parent, but not realizing all the own old wounds, right? That are going to come up in that from your own childhood. What's going to get activated in you, the things, how you thought it was going to be. I say with becoming a parent, there's as much joy in what you gain as long as with deep grief and loss. And a lot of times you don't have permission to speak to that. But you need support. You need love and care around that. So again, just noticing what's supporting bad behavior, just in that sense of like it's keeping the relationship sick. And again, moving away from blaming and saying we are co-creating this. You are just as responsible for whatever you do in response to someone else's bad behavior. You're not responsible for their behavior, but you're responsible for your response. And I kind of say, I want you to get to a place where you feel proud of your response. You don't feel shame from your response. You don't feel neglected, right? Like you may not be at what you fully need, but that you can leave and be like, wow, I am proud of what I did there. Of this deep sense of moving towards warmth, care, and safety. So, and I'll tell people, kind of ride or die with the relationship. Just a reminder of that. I'm not here to help you figure out whether you should stay together or not. But I'll often feel like something's got to give or something's really going to break. Like we will feel that. So I can bring a sense of urgency there, but I will be an advocate for the relationship. And as long as you're still wanting to do that with me, we'll keep working. So.
John, I have a question for you there.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't work with couples, but something that I have noticed kind of like helping some younger folks kind of like they're in their work with couples. Something about what you just said, like how do you kind of balance or kind of like speak to I'm not here to help you kind of figure out whether you should stay together or not. Can you talk to that a little bit more and how you kind of structure that conversation or kind of like toe that line of like still continuing to keep the relationship in focus as we're kind of like guiding those explorations?
Yeah, I love using sort of that vehicle analogy here where I'll even switch more to like less from a car and more to a boat. Like your boat has come into harbor and it's got a bunch of holes in it. It's barely floating, right? And so what can I give you that will make this journey more enjoyable, right? And what I mean by that is you are just surviving. And let's say you have been extraordinarily resilient. Resilience is this beautiful thing we have, but that if you stay in it too long, again, it harms you more than it gives you. Resilience is always what is meant to get us to more, right? Resilience is we go with less so that we can get to more, right? Like if I sprain my ankle on a hike, I need to use resilience to get down the mountain to my car so that I can get the medical attention that I need. But if I just ignore the injury and just keep walking around and like, oh, it doesn't hurt, like just the resilience, like, I don't know so much with a sprained ankle, but with certain injuries, like you'll just make it even worse. Right. So it's kind of like, I'm here to give you what you need. And so you'll get that and the relationship will benefit from that. Does that kind of answer that? Or so you're always honoring that, but you're saying like, you will benefit from more here.
Hi. Along the same lines, are there times often, maybe even temporarily for you? I think this is one of my fears with couples work, which I haven't started or done yet, but is that you kind of get the feeling of like, man, there's too many holes. This thing is just like it is just hobbling along, and you yourself as a therapist even get overwhelmed in your role of supporting the relationship. Maybe some examples of when that happened and the questions you ask yourself in that place.
Most likely, most of the time, they've been operating with those holes for a very long time. So you'll get activated. You'll have this urgency like, man, I got to patch these holes before this thing sinks.
That urgency. Yeah, that's urgency. A good, like, it's been there for a while, but it's maybe not as urgent as it appears.
So you're going to feel that. You're going to feel that panic. You're going to feel like, even just with the two people looking at it, like, look, our boat's going down. Why are you just staring at us? Why aren't you telling us how to patch these holes? And there's some of where you have to sit in that with them. And again, sort of remind yourself, maybe we're in the harbor already. And because I'll even say this, there's some things that you'll be able to offer, and it all depend on who it is. Like I'll say, like if the water's like just below your nose, like that's intolerable. Like just a little splash of water, you're inhaling water, like any disturbance in the surface of the water, right? You think of sleep, right? Like your partner does something like, you motherfucker, like you shut me, like the water's up to here. But if I can get the water just to here, like it's a world of difference, right? So again, you're bringing yourself back down to a human level of like, I can't patch these holes. I can only point to them. You will have to be the ones that patch them. And some of it is like looking at the holes and being like, man, how has it been to be journeying in this boat? right? So that sense of honoring and joining and getting in there with them, they're the ones that know why the holes are there. I may not even know yet, right? What is actually repairing them, I may not know yet, right? So yeah, there's going to be this urgency to start repairing the holes. And sometimes there will be some things that you can offer, like, like, yeah, every time you get mad, you say something really mean, right? And that needs to stop immediately, or anything you do, that sort of just washes away, right? So there is some things that you can, like, that's why I even like the Four Horsemen, is it gets at some of the real more serious holes. Like even Gottman says, like in his research, like if any of these four of these are persistent, this is our four main things. I mean, there's probably more than that, but these are the things that really, lead a relationship to its demise. So, but sometimes that activation is more of that own panic in me where my brain is falling out. And I kind of have to go back to, right, like that tenderness place. How can I offer care, safety? So yeah, I don't know how satisfying that answer is, but yeah, that's part of this growing piece of it. You will learn how to like manage and tolerate that. But yes, often you will feel like, man, we're on a sinking ship. We're about to drown. So, and it's giving you an experience of what they're feeling and experiencing in the relationship for sure. So, yeah.
That's really helpful because if you think about it with individual therapy, there's never a point where you're like, nah, this, like that's not an option to bail on the individual level. So just that idea of, yeah, sitting with and bringing tenderness, I think is really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I was thinking about her question, and one thing that helps me in therapy when I start to feel something is reminding myself that my opinions don't really don't matter. Like what if I'm thinking, oh, they should bail, like I check myself and sometimes might even ask, like, is this worth it to you to keep trying? Do you, if they want to keep trying, that's for them to decide. So if I start to feel any type of way, I check myself. And like you said, they're used to the holes. This is their relationship. And so remembering that their experiences and their perception of their relationship is completely different than ours. So it's when I start having my own opinions or thoughts, it's like my red flag to myself. Oh, check yourself. Take a huge step back. This is not for you to be thinking or deciding anything. Because remember, we're not there to decide for them. We're there to help them to decide. So it's a good red flag in individual or couples. As soon as I start to feel, I take a huge step back and check myself. And then if I am really curious, if it really is pressing, then I just ask them, in a therapeutic way. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's been helpful to me because it can get especially overwhelming when you got multiple people in the room. You feel things because they're feeling it, you're feeling it.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of a thing I often say is the relationship is far more capable than they imagine or can feel in the moment, right? So, yeah, you're feeling what they're experiencing, but that's what the whole sense of like they may have been traveling with these holes for quite a long time, so they've already learned to live with them. But there is a point, right? Like you get into safety, you get into some things that are really detrimental. It's different, but when it comes to like when we're not in any of those like red flag categories where you would terminate treatment for that sort of reason, yeah.
I asked John, how do you approach apathy? Like maybe when one person in the dyad has, there's a lot of energy when there's anger, or even, there's a lot of energy in the room. And what do you do when maybe one of the partners of the dyad is experiencing, immense apathy? Just curious where you go.
Yeah. There's usually, especially if it's the scenario, someone got drugged to therapy. They came kicking and screaming. So yes, it is trying to find that place where they have buy-in and say, you will only benefit by participating more. Your apathy, right? Again, protection, it's defense. So that curiosity piece. I'm noticing how inactive you are here. What is going on? Right? Again, that apathy piece, right, can also be some sort of dynamic, whether from their attachment, from their family of origin, or again, speaking to the fixed roles here, right? I'm often listening for who is the gas and who is the brakes in the relationship, right? The apathetic one kind of can be the one that's kind of pumping brakes. And usually because you're inviting me to something that feels too scary is my hunch most of the time. But we'll find out, right? Could be depression, could be some other things for sure. But if there's a sense of apathy, we know that a deep wound is close by. So I try to find ways for them to buy into, because even the apathetic person usually has plenty of complaints or plenty of blame. And that's piece that I love about couples therapy. And when I was working with Doug, and because sometimes I had this question a lot, like, well, what if couples work, like, because sometimes you'll feel this strong urge to work with just one of the clients. And for me, often, because I love working with men, I think it's not always the man, but I would think there would be something like, man, I wish this guy was seeing me individually right now. And we could do some real fun stuff. But what I started to learn is the less activated one, the apathetic one, often needs their life sitting on the couch with them. And if I was to see them individually, I would never see where they actually get activated. So even the apathetic one will get activated somewhere in the relationship and wants something to be different, even if it's just leave me the hell alone. Now, that's not where we're going, but he's telling me something he has he or she has a buy-in towards. So, or they.
John, I'm curious about the pursuer distancer. We've talked a few times about the pursuer needing to maybe slow down, stop pursuing. When I've read the attached book, the distancer, the avoidant type, tends to have like a physiological thing happening that's really hard to work through. How do you work with the distancer in a dyad?
I'll often say in that helping the pursuer depersonalize the distancing. They're moving away from me because they don't love me. They don't like me. That can be the case, but if they're coming to couples therapy, that's probably not it. Right? So that's where, again, that curiosity piece comes in. What is so terrifying about me coming close to you that you have no other choice but to move away? So I honor, right? I don't shame them. I'm not going to police the moving away. I'm going to say, what is so dangerous that you're moving away from? And imagine if you didn't. What would you need or want to come on the other side of that? Now, part of that, right? Like, and then with the pursuer, I'm saying stay, right? Because you're saying that your pursuit is all that's keeping them from running away from you. What if you didn't chase them and they didn't go anywhere? Imagine the safety you would experience in that. and the two exacerbate each other, right? But can you stay close enough, long enough to see what could happen? Sometimes that can even be a great opportunity for doing an individual session, is talking about the pursuer distancer and having each one of them have this space where you can say some of these things if you have a fear of the other person may weaponize that against them. But, or again, like, man, let's like talk about your distancing. Let's talk about your pursuing, and like taking one-on-one sessions to do that. And then kind of like how we make sense to how that's co-created and what's happening there. So that could be an example of like where you would really benefit from a split time like that. And even if the distancing is dysfunctional, it has a function. And I'm trying to make it dysfunctional to say, you know, you can get something a whole lot more than that. You can get a whole new white windshield motor. My ridiculous example. What else? Anything else? For kind of somewhat for my own benefit, now that I've shared these things with you, how would you feel in like taking that, like if you're really seriously considering, or you can think of it hypothetically too, of like seeing a first couple, like, does this feel like it gives you something that like, you know, because I even hope it leaves a ton of space for you to bring all of yourself into all of this, right? Like you can take anything I shared and you make it yours, but sometimes you use someone else's jacket or you try their stuff on and then you use it. Is anything coming up for you that you're feeling like, man, I wish I would have heard more about this, right? So kind of like, how do you feel like the handholds I give you, and is there any handholds that feel like they're still missing for you? Or you can say anything else either too. But
I can chime in. I think the handholds are have been like really helpful. I remember you saying that you worked with Doug, and one of the things that he addressed in lectures was like the if one of the people in the couple is seen as the problem in the relationship, either by them or by both of the people in the couple. And I'm wondering, yeah, that just got me thinking about like how to address that if that's the case, if they're both seeing one of the people as the problem, even if they're acknowledging that they're two people and all of that, but if like that is the dynamic within the couple of like you're the problem here.
yeah, and something that Doug, I don't know if he offered this to me along those lines, but he offered me this. How uncreative of you to take all the blame. I think we can get a bit more creative or a bit more dynamic or get a fuller picture of what's actually happening here. So in some ways, again, you point to how that's going to create this fixedness and it's going to cause all these problems. So you don't try to take that away from them. You're trying to understand it, but you're saying like, I hope we can move beyond that, right? Because it's again, like there probably makes a lot of sense on why they have that role, right? So there's a deep understanding of why they have that. And it can be true. It can be true in assessing it, you know, right? Like that you are the more sick one, you're the more problematic one. And the relationship, if I'm not trying to figure out that you are too sick to be in a relationship with this person, if we're not trying to figure that out, we're trying to figure out how we can create a relationship that instead of you being sick, you can be well. How do we create, guard and nurture the relationship to be what you need it to be, right? Instead of the sick one, right? And that's all there's space for you to be in this relationship. How do we make space for you to be the one that is getting well? Well, we're at the end here. Good to be with you all. If questions come up for you or anything like that, or you find that there could be a benefit for you in connecting with me, feel free to reach out. I'll be sending you guys out an email after this, just kind of saying like, great having you all. I do one-on-one consults. I'm going to be starting a couples consult here at some point. But yeah, whether it's just to connect or do something more on a more official stance, just let me know. But I love doing that. In part of, for me, it's like even doing this training, like this is like sort of sharpening me, or like, internalizing or integrating more things into my work. So if there's something that felt helpful for you to hear and it would be helpful for you to connect with me, feel free to reach out, or any feedback you have. Some of that is done. I'm gonna just remembering that I have to post the link for you all to get the survey. So let me put that in the chat. Where is my email?
And
Oh,
I'll
there it
also be sending an email, a follow-up email that'll have a link to this video, in case there's things anybody wants to refer back to. And I will also add, in addition to the survey John's posting, I'll put the survey link in there as well. So just make sure to fill it out, and then there's instructions in the email, but you'll email it to Alyssa here at Selfspace. It's Alyssa@selfspaceseattle.com. And she's the one that will be sending you your CEU certificate. So
I don't know why. Sorry, that first time I sent it just to Hannah for some reason. This should be to the whole group now. There we go.
awesome.
Cool.
John, thank you so much. This has been incredible.
Yeah.
And just thank you for the just warm, conversational, very curious environment you created for us today. Feels like there's a lot of room to go play, is how I feel ending this with compassion. So I see Julie's clapping. I see smiles. So thanks, Reagan. I love that. I've never seen that feature. That's funny. Yeah. So John, thank you so much. Really appreciate all your effort to put this together for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool.
All right. See y'all.
All right. Have a great
John.
weekend.
Thanks. Bye.